Everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about my book that I've been working on since December of 2021, as well as discuss what progress I have made so far. I will also talk about future plans I have regarding the book and some ideas I have in store. I'll then talk about what areas of the book I think I've done well and what just some stuff I need to improve on. Anyways, let's get into it. So this part of the video is supposed to be more for people who might not be aware that I'm writing a book or have never watched a story time or don't really know about me. So if you are already aware about me writing a book or know the story of how I got myself here, I have chapters providing the description of this video so you can direct yourself to which one you want to. Anyways, for part 1 of this video, let's discuss how I got myself into writing a book. So to understand how I got myself to this point, we need to go back all the way to February of 2017. I was in the 7th grade and was a little over 12 and a half years old. This would be when I 100%ed Super Mario Galaxy for the first time. Even though I first played this video game back in 2011, I had not 100%ed the game until this point. I decided that after doing all this, that I look back and rank the 10 hardest levels, or stars as they're called. In order to 100% Super Mario Galaxy, you must beat all levels with both Mario and Luigi, so it's safe to say that I was definitely in the position to determine what the hardest and easiest stars were, as I had to collect all of them twice. So I stayed up around 2 a.m. on a Friday night working on this, and by the end of it, I was very satisfied with what I had written. The list ended up being almost 2,000 words long on 6 pages, which was longer than anything I had written for school, and the best part was that I would thoroughly enjoy writing this. I love looking back on the game and comparing different levels, so I continued to make lists like these throughout the rest of 2017. But then, starting in 2018, we had a period where I didn't really write a whole lot. Of course, we'll discuss in a bit, early 2018 was when I was at my worst mentally, and some pretty bad stuff happened. But then in August, I would pick up with writing again, this time writing about Pokemon. From lists about my top 10 favorite Pokemon, to the top 10 hardest gym leaders, even to the top 10 Pokemon I would love to have in real life, these lists got very creative and were actually a lot more well written than I often think they are. But then, I would kind of stop writing again or until around May of 2019. And I would actually not write very much throughout the rest of 2019 and almost the entirety of 2020. However, November 2020 ended up being probably the third worst month of my life, behind March and February of 2018. On November 13th, 2020, a Friday, I received a text stating that one of my best friends passed away. I do not want to talk about how he died, but I'll say that how he died made me extremely upset at myself, knowing that I once went through the same things he went through. So for really the next month, I grieved his death and was very unproductive and really had a hard time focusing on anything. However, Christmas Eve of 2020 was when things changed for the better. My friend only lived 15 years. I was 16 and a half at this point, so I thought that like his family was probably looking over his life, why not I try to look over mine as a way to help deal with this loss? So I came up with the idea of a YouTube series called Storytime, where I talked about different things I've experienced and talk about them in detail. My first Storytime was written and released on January 1st, 2021, and in both my skill in writing and mood shot through the roof throughout 2021. Storytime was extremely significant. I wrote a total of 44 story times throughout 2021. Not only did I get better at writing in general, but I also got better at writing really long papers. In fact, the longest story time I wrote, which was Storytime 43, had a word count of 46,424 words on 119 pages. It took me an entire month to write it. Yeah, that's pretty long. But the length isn't everything. What really matters is the quality. As I wrote more and more story times, I began to write much higher quality story times and record much higher quality videos. Like it's almost impossible to compare Storytime 1 to Storytime 44, as they're just so different from one another. Now I want to jump to May of 2021. In English, we were assigned a project where we had to write a short book in the style of a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. O'Brien is a Vietnam War veteran who has written multiple books about his experiences in Vietnam, but he has a very interesting style where he doesn't make his book exactly what happened, but he still makes himself the main character and makes it so you think it actually happened. The book does a great job of manipulating characters like Jimmy Cross and Rat, who are not real, into making you think they're real with their interactions with Brian. So for this project, we had to write a short book in this style. At the time, I was writing Storytime 19, which is about my swimming career. So I decided to write this book about swimming. I absolutely loved going back to this book, as it was just so well written and the book flowed so well despite not being in chronological order, which replicates the style of the things they carried perfectly. The teacher said herself that out of all the years she has assigned this project, my book was one of the best ones ever submitted, so I think it's safe to say this was a very well written book. Now, my teacher actually made these comments about 7 months after I submitted this project to her, which would have been December 10th, 2021. This was my very last day of high school, so it was a very emotional day for not just me, but my teachers as well, since they've seen me grow and over the past years. And I was also always a very respected student back at my old high school. Me and my English teacher were talking about this project in particular, and that was when she challenged me to do something that I didn't even think I had the capability to do at the time. She challenged me to write and publish a book. Despite some doubt, I just decided to take up on our challenge. That night, I would brainstorm ideas for this book and then write chapter 1 the next day. So yeah, that's how I got myself into writing the book. Let's move on to part 2 in this video. For this part, let's discuss some basic information about the book, such as the title, genre, inspiration of the book, and the structure. So firstly, what is my book called? Well, the book, as you might guess from the title of this video, is called The Charm. The reason I titled the book this way is because early into the book, there's a very important character who is notable for wearing a unicorn horn charm around her neck. Unicorns symbolize beauty, and wearing a unicorn horn, shit, I can't read. The character who wears this charm is very attractive and very sweet young girl, so that's why I decided to title the book this way. However, later on into the book, she is going to be a scapegoat, which is an innocent character who receives all the blame and terror that our very evil world throws upon them. Now, like the things they carried, the main character in this book is actually the author, being me. However, this is actually 13-year-old Zachary Baynard, although it is 18-year-old me looking back on it. It's like the things they carried in the sense that the book is just like a memoir where I as an adult look back on something from my childhood. Just like how in the things they carried, O'Brien is 43 years old looking back at himself at 18 years old. Therefore, the entire book is in past tense. The book is also very obviously in first person. So, as for what the book takes inspiration from, the storyline is based on the events of Storytime 40. In this storytime, I told about my 8th grade school year, but in the first half of the storytime, I detailed my experience dealing with depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempting suicide. This is what this book is about, so unlike most of my previous writings that were generally pretty humorous, this is a pretty serious book. And so far, throughout what I have written so far, I think I've done a great job in conveying that this book needs to be taken really seriously throughout multiple instances of violence and vulgar scenes. More on that later. The book in general is supposed to be extremely violent, as my number one goal of this book is to demonstrate what it feels like to be suicidal. By reading this book, you get to understand what 13-year-old me went through and how it not only made me absolutely miserable, but it ultimately changed my life forever. That brings me to the question, what genre is this book? Well, all literature can have multiple genres. For example, all fictional literature can be considered either a children's book, a young adult book, or an adult fiction. The Charm is by far an adult fiction, as not only is swearing extremely prevalent throughout this book, but the amount of violence and gory topics would definitely make this an 18+ read. Now, unless you are writing a children's book, you won't advertise a book as a young adult or adult fiction. You'll instead advertise it under the main genre, so things like comedies, romances, mysteries, that kind of nature. The Charm would be classified as a horror fiction. I chose this genre because it allows me to be as vulgar as possible, which is needed when writing a book of this nature. The book already features some incredibly scary scenes, particularly with nightmare chapters, which I'll get to later. So that's why this book would be considered a horror fiction. Finally, to wrap up part 2, let's talk about the structure of the book. So this book, of course, is structured like the things they carried. However, this book is in chronological order. There will be only one instance that it is not, but for the vast majority of the book, it is in chronological order. The chapter lengths are also very short. I've always preferred books with like 100 short chapters over books with like 15 very long chapters, as it's easier to mark my place and finish up. So that's why I've chose to write multiple short chapters over a few long ones. So then for part 3. This part is about the progress I have made on the book so far, which is why I'm making this video. So currently I am 179 pages into The Charm, putting me at chapter 26 and about 32,000 words in. The book is expected to be between 500 to 700 pages long and about 100,000 to 150,000 words long. That might not sound like much considering I've already written a 46,000 word story time, as well as 4 other story times that have exceeded 30,000 words. However, one thing I have learned from writing this book is that writing story times and writing actual literature people will read are 2 different processes. Storytime is written to be spoken, therefore I don't have to worry about overusing words or phrases, as storytimes are written to flow off the tongue as easily as possible. This book is not meant for me to read aloud. It's meant to be ready for yourself, for yourself. So I have to manage and compose sentences in a much different manner than Storytime, which has been a huge transition, but I've been getting through it pretty well. Overall, I do expect this book to be published sometime in 2023. I'll probably finish writing it by the end of 2022, and then I'll have to go through the publishing process. I plan to self-publish this book off Amazon as well as a few other platforms, and maybe print and sign a few copies as well. It'll all really depend on cost though, as it could get pretty expensive, but I'll get through it and get it out won't be too difficult. I also want to mention this is the third version of the book. I've had two versions. The first version was the one I worked on from December 2021 to late January of 2022. I decided to redo it because I did not like the production of it. Then version 2 went from January to April of 2022. I was very distracted with college and I was not in a pretty spot mentally, so I decided to redo it back in April again, and this is the version that I've been working on since and will be the one that gets published. So that's kind of been the history regarding it. So now for the second to last part of this video, let's go over the plot of the book so far. So the chapter starts out with a nightmare I have in which I am in a cave and all of a sudden a demonic figure with an evil bloody smile appears and says some pretty demonic stuff. Most notably, he says that my fate will be the charm. Psst, foreshadowing. I didn't wake up and that is that. The second chapter is my first day back at school from Christmas break. This book actually starts in January of 2018. Originally, it was going to start in August 2017. However, I decided that it would be more convenient to start in January, and I think I made a good call on that, as I'm not even in February yet, and already almost 200 pages in. Anyways, this chapter is the bus ride to school. We got a new bus driver who assigned me to sit at the back of the bus, so I sat there. However, we didn't pick up a bully, who she assigns to have behind me. This bully is based off one of the bullies who actually drove me to suicide back in 8th grade. I decided to name him Justin. He'll be the main antagonist throughout the book. Now, when looking back on the bullies, the main conclusion I draw from them is that they were by far some of the most immature people I had ever met. So therefore, I gave this same trait to Justin. Justin is an extremely immature brat who makes his best effort to harass me and make me look bad. Why? Well, he's the wide receiver on the football team. He's one of the most popular kids at school. He needs someone to bully to make him feel quote-unquote tough. Of course, in reality, the bullies were not tough at all, just a bunch of bobble-headed pigs with absolutely no sympathy for others' well-being. So he shouts some rather sexual and extremely uncomfortable things about me that are not only untrue, but are just downright weird. In fact, it should really be him that gets harassed for even thinking about these things. But this is middle school, therefore, everyone laughs to death whenever someone says the word penis, because that's funny for some reason. That's what happens, and the whole bus gets into it while I'm sitting there trying to ignore them, and they stay entertained. And of course, the bus driver doesn't do anything about it. On top of that, there's a girl in the seat beside me who records me and shouts insults at me as well. This unfortunately is based off a true story. I was bullied very heavily on the bus back in the 8th grade. The people who bullied me would shout insults and extremely uncomfortable things about me on the bus while the bus driver didn't do anything. After March 8th, Mom started taking me to and from school to get away from this, but at the time, it was just awful. Anyways, the next few chapters go into detail about my class schedule and what goes on and stuff like that. But art, the last class of the day, is super important. A new student is introduced. She's a really attractive 7th grade girl. The teacher actually recommends she sits with me, which she does, and we immediately become best friends. Her name is Leslie. She also wears a unicorn horn charm around her neck. This is of course the girl that I was talking about earlier, by the way. Anyways, throughout the next few chapters, me and Leslie are talking. I also talk about swimming, as that also had a toll on my mental health during this time, particularly with my coach who expected too much out of me. I also have a few nightmares, including one where my coach turns into a shark and eats me and a bunch of other swimmers, and then I wake up before he bites me. Then in chapter 15, Leslie and I are in art, but we come across a video that ends up putting me in a bad mood. So the girl that recorded me on the bus posted that video, and it garnered over 8 million views. And the worst part is that the comments on that video were just disgusting. They weren't just comments that were teasing me. No, they were actual death threats. Leslie talks me through it and tells me that I'm worth it and stuff, and while it does help, I'm still in fear. So after class, Leslie tells the principal about it and her worries. As a result, both the girl who recorded me, whose name is Riley, and Justin get suspended for a week. Technically, you could consider Leslie a snitch here, however, it's still pretty obvious that she did the right thing, since videoing someone trying to mind his own business is very wrong. Not all these death threats and now all these death threats and just seeing the video in general made me really upset and feel bad at myself. As a result, in chapter 16, I dream what currently sits as the most violent and scariest chapter in the book so far. If you need any convincing that this is a horror book, this chapter sure does it. Anyways, this chapter takes direct inspiration from It by Stephen King. The book is about a clown called Pennywise who feasts on children. In this chapter, a clown kidnaps me and takes me to his house, where he feeds me some meat, but then he reveals that that meat is actually human meat. So I try to make a run for it, but fail as his wife comes in and stops me. While being restrained by her, the clown then reveals that he also has kidnapped Leslie, whom he takes out of his safe place and put her on a counter. She had no clothes on, she had no clothes on, and she was completely tied, and her mouth was also taped up. In fact, she wasn't even wearing her glasses. It was just her charm. He then draws out his knife and begins stabbing her. I try to look away like any normal human would, but the wife forces my head towards the crime and I scream while Leslie dies. After killing her, the clown then comes to me and tries to kill me, but I wake up before he does. But chapter 17 is also really an interesting chapter, as Leslie tells me that she's been having nightmares. She talks about a dream she had that night about a clown who kidnapped her and how he brutally killed me, which was basically the same nightmare I had, just that our roles were reversed. I tell her what happened in my dream, and then we find out that we have the same nightmare. But then I learned something very important about Leslie. She has been diagnosed with depression. It's understood that since we have the same nightmares, we may be experiencing the same things, and we are. That girl or Riley, is a cheerleader, and she and her friends are bullying Leslie the same way Justin and his friends are bullying me. So I have the feeling that I might have depression myself. But then in chapter 20, Leslie proves that I have depression as she asks me a few questions that I answer exactly how she did when she was at the psychologist's office. So she officially diagnoses me with depression. However, what is not known is that Leslie's depression is a lot more extreme than mine. In chapter 21, we see the first instance of suicidal thoughts, where Leslie makes comments such as, "Sometimes I wish I can close my eyes and never wake up," and "I sometimes wish I was like that spider you just killed." I didn't really think much of these at first, but I will live on to regret this decision. In chapter 24, Leslie reveals even more suicidal thoughts that she has by asking me if I would rather not be alive. But after asking these questions, she says that I'm the only reason that that this isn't reality. For the rest of the chapter, I reflect on what she says and am extremely confused and concerned. But like in chapter 21, I brush this off and don't think it's really much of a big deal. Then for the latest chapter I've written, being chapter 25, I have a nightmare that's like a sequel to chapter 16. I'm in English, and our teacher gathers us around for a class discussion. Except this class discussion isn't on any book or anything like that. It's about the best way to kill people. She then goes off on how she and her husband killed a young girl that morning and almost killed her boyfriend, but he escaped. At first, I thought she's crazy, but can't be about me or Leslie since we're not dating. However, she pulls out a bloody knife that looks exactly like the one that the clown used to kill Leslie. She then reveals that the name of both Leslie and me, and then I make a run for it. I try to run outside the school, but Justin comes out of nowhere and punches me right in the face. I end up getting blood covered over my eyes, nose, and mouth as my glasses break. I then try to get up, but Justin picks me up and holds me by the throat against a wall. He then pulls out the same knife the clown used to kill Leslie and stabs me, only for me to wake up before it touches me. Now, the interesting thing about that nightmare is that this is an actual nightmare I had. So, ever since March 8th, I've had multiple incredibly violent nightmares about the situation. This was one of them, except it was a little different. I had it in April of 2018. At the time, my left arm was in a splint as I had broken my arms a few weeks prior. Anyways, I dreamed that my English teacher had a so-called cure for my broken arm. The cure is completely cutting them off, so she cuts my right arm off. I didn't scream and run away before she cuts off my left one. I almost make it out to school, but one of the boys comes over, punches me in the face, and does exactly what Justin does in the book. So yeah, that's all the progress I've made so far. So let's move on to the last part of the video, my plans for the future. So upon this video being released, I have already written chapter 26. However, I will not mention it until the next progress video I make since Okay, moving on. Anyways, chapter 26, my intentions are for Justin to pretty much get his revenge on me in PE. Then in lunch for chapter 28, it'll be, or 27, is when Justin's going to get his revenge on me in PE. Then in lunch for chapter 28, it'll be the same way. Chapter 29 will be when me and Leslie reunite and talk, and then Chapter 30 will be the drive back home, where there will pretty much be a repeat of Chapter 2. Whereas except Justin harassing me, it's Justin and Riley harassing me and Leslie. Chapter 31 will be a swim practice where I'll have to endure a pretty brutal set and other stuff. Then for Chapter 32, it will pretty much be another nightmare chapter. I have a whole lot more planned for the book, but that's about the extent that I'll talk about, as I'll have a little more about this stuff in my second progress video. However, I do want to talk a little bit about nightmares. So I have a few nightmares already planned out, with Chapter 32 as one of them. Some of these nightmares are of course based on actual nightmares I've had, but there will also be some based on music, literature, movies, and just from pure imagination. Like I have two future nightmares chapters based off two Slipknot songs, those songs being particular being Disaster Piece and Wait and Bleed. I also have a future chapter based on the horror movie Child's Play, and I even have a chapter based off a Detroit documentary I watched a month ago. The last nightmare chapter will be the nightmare after the climax, which I am catching up to, so I don't really have to do much planning anymore, since all these plans have come into fruition. So that's where I'm at. I of course still have plenty of waking life chapters planned as well, but I guess I'll just have to continue to write, and of course make another progress video for y'all once I feel like I've made enough progress. So yeah, that's where I'm at in my book so far. I still have a ton of work to do, but the production is so far going very smoothly and is starting to get easier and easier. So that's where I'm at so far. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye!